for today's festival. So we're nearing the end of the festival actually today. We've only got one more panel after this. We're going to start off with an introduction to all of the lovely authors that we've got here and their books, starting with Conrad because he's next to me at the top.
Hiya, I'm Conrad Jones. My island books are set on the island of Anglesey, which is off the coast of North Wales. The Anglesey Murders series is just coming up for 10 books now, and that's one which is right in the middle, which is What Happened to Rachel. And I like this one because Amazon asked to trial making a hardback. So this is the only hardback of this particular title. So I keep it on the shelf there. One day it'll be worth about a tenner.
Absolutely.
And Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly Clayton, and I write the DCI Jack Leclair mystery series, and that's set on the island of Jersey. So that is in the Channel Islands, and it's in between France and the UK, but much closer to France. We're only about an hour by boat. But very British in nature. There's 4 books in the series so far, and there'll be a 5th one coming out soon. And I started with Blood in the Sand, very apt for an island.
And Myra?
Hello, I'm Myra Duffy, and I write what's called Cozy Crime, set on the Isle of Bute, which is a small island just off the west coast of Scotland. It's got a long history, so I do include a lot of history and geography in my novels. And my main character is an amateur sleuth, is a woman who just seems always to land up where there's trouble. I've written so far 9. I'm on my 10th book in the series, although I've also written some novellas, and particularly round about Christmas time, I have one which I kind of promote, which is a Christmas novella. But the latest one in the series is the Bride's Hill one, and that is set on the Isle of Bute. It's set actually in the old Rothsey Academy, the old main school in the island, which sadly they've just pulled down, but that's nothing to do with me. It's not my fault. And my heroine, Alison Cameron, is, as I say, an amateur sleuth who just seems always to land in trouble.
It's excellent. We'll start off easy with why you chose the island that you did to set your books on. Who wants to start? So we'll keep going around in that order. So Conrad, do you want to start us off? Why did you choose Anglesey?
Because I lived there, and I think that sort of it was a bit of a no-brainer really. Whenever I needed a port, then Holyhead, which is the main port on Anglesey, and it's one of the biggest links from Europe to Ireland. There's an awful lot of shenanigans goes through that port, so it just sort of seemed the ideal place to set the book. And it was also sort of in the early days, it was certainly part and parcel of thinking about how I'm going to market the books when they were written. And obviously, if you're writing about local places that are familiar to the people around you or whatever, then they're more likely to download the book and give it a try, especially in the early days when you're always testing the water as in your first few novels. Quite nervous as to whether people are going to like them or not, and really sort of setting it where all the sights and the sounds and the names of places, you can describe them quite easily because they're vivid in your imagination. I think it was just automatically that was the place to set the books.
Kelly?
Yeah, well, I live in Jersey, so that's another sort of good reason to kick it off. The very first first draft of the manuscript for the first book was written with a very good friend in mind who unfortunately was very, very ill and had been taken to the UK, to hospital. And the book hadn't been set in Jersey to begin with. It was set in the UK as I'd started writing it. But I changed it, so it was set in Jersey because I wanted her. She was actually in Bournemouth in hospital, and I ended up sending her, snippets of the book as I went through it. And I wanted something that was a reminder for her of her home. So, for example, there's some dogs appear in the first book, and they were her dogs, and I just wanted, to bring sort of that to it. And then, of course, once it was out there, I kind of just had to keep going with it being in Jersey. But I do think it's especially because it's in an island. I think that there's eccentricities, there's that there's perhaps things that happen and are dealt with in a certain way with a smaller community you wouldn't get perhaps amongst larger crowds. So I think that's why I've kept it there.
Myra, why Butte?
The Isle of Bute is only 35 minutes by ferry from the mainland, and from Glasgow it's probably about an hour and a half in total. So I kind of divide my time between the two places. And as regards the very first book in the Isle of Bute series, it all happened by chance. There are a lot of Victorian properties in the island. The Victorian days were the heyday of Bute, when people went doon the water, as they say, to have their holidays there. And it was very popular because it was so close to Glasgow. And one of the evenings we were walking along Ettrick Bay, and I thought, wonder what would happen if there was a large Victorian house here, wonder what it would be like. And that was the kind of genesis of the whole book and the plot. And then since that was really very successful, I wrote the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And I've written in other genres, but that really is my favourite to write. And as I say, it's cosy crime. Anything really nasty happens off stage, and nothing happens to the actual inhabitants of the island. It's all about incomers. The inhabitants are quite safe.
So what are the downsides of writing something on such a small location? But imagine all the things you get from an island. You're going to
the downsides.
Downsides to an island setting.
Yeah, the downsides really. It's, I think Anglesey at the moment touching 1,000 the population. The side of the island that I write about, which is predominantly Holyhead and Charlotte Bay, the north side of the island, really, it's easy to pick a name, which is common on the island, and you've got to be very careful. You don't actually use somebody's name. So from that point of view, places with a small population, they can read a book which is sort of set in the locality of where they live. It might mention their local shop or the local pub, and they go, "Oh, that must be Bill, from the pub. That must be him." Blah blah blah. And then you've got to be really careful then that people aren't identifying themselves with some of the unwholesome characters in the book. I think that's really pretty much the only downside I could think of. Apart from maybe using the same locations a little bit too often. When you get to a series, which is, I'm writing number 10 at the moment, and I really do have to think, have I used that school before? Have I used that village before? Because you don't want it to get samey, although it needs to be similar and continuous with the rest of the series. You don't want to be repetitive, and you can be without actually knowing it.
I think that's really, really valid. Jersey, there's probably just over 100,000, and we're 9 miles by 5 miles. But I think there's over like 300 odd bays. I think that's a great point. When I can't remember which book it was, but one of the final readers was a local resident, and he's one of the constables of one of the parishes, and he read the book and he came back and he said, "Look, I don't have any comments to make." He said, "Except one. You've used the name of such and such as a witness to something that happens." He said, "But you'll have to change that because that's actually a real person and I know her." And I said, "I know. I did an auction at the Red Cross Ball and she won the right to have her name in the book." But it is that kind of thing. And especially with, there's names obviously that are, sort of old Jersey names. And you have to be so careful, I think, in picking things like that. And then I think the point as well about You know, in one of the books I had some, obviously there's a big fishing industry here, like in, I guess, most islands, and there's lots of stalls and, you know, sort of pop-up shops and things from the fishermen selling the fish direct. And I wanted one of them that was very, very good, and then one of them that wasn't going to be quite so good at all. So I had to go and look at all the different fish places we had so that nothing I said could be construed as if it was, you know, sort of matching one of those. And I think that's, you're right, that's probably the biggest thing you have to be concerned about. And then I suppose for me, it's like, we're so far away from the UK, you can't have someone just sort of suddenly get, you know, across to England. You have to like plan it through, which kind of slows up the action a little bit. So mine tend to stay very much in Jersey.
Well, my characters, I would echo what both of you say, but I did write one book, which is this one, which is called Dark Deeds at Butte Noir. Every year, well, before the pandemic, there was a crime festival on the island, a crime writers festival on the island in late July, early August. And this one that I wrote especially for it, but almost all the characters in the book are islanders. I just asked them all if they would like to appear. So this one is a sort of one-off, which is only for sale really at that festival. And that's one way, as you say quite rightly, Kelly, that's one way around it, to make sure that the person or people concerned know that they're in it. But by and large, I just try to avoid it. I do have your problem, Conrad, that there are a number of names which are very specific to the island, and you have to be very careful that. So I end up with some very strange surnames for people sometimes, but I feel that's better to make them up than to try and perhaps a real person would appear in it unwittingly. Butte itself is it's 15 miles by 5 miles, but there are only 6,000 people on it. So it's a very small population, and that's why you have to be very, very careful that you don't actually name real people in any of the books. So yes, it can be tricky.
I think I should say just on that point, Myra, is that I think, you know, and Conrad, you mentioned it as well, it's about people and then recognising, you know, oh, is that such and such, as you said, you know, is that the guy, you know, from the corner shop? What I find happens, which is really funny, is like people will either say, was that me? And I'm like, no, honestly, it wasn't you. Or they'll say, that was definitely such and such. And in the first book, there's an estate agent. And a really, really good friend of mine runs one of the biggest estate agencies in the island. And she said, is that me? I said, no, it's absolutely not you. It really, really isn't. She went, oh, she said, can I tell people it's me? I said, if you want, yeah, just go ahead if it makes you happy.
It is difficult. Well, Butte does get quite a lot, obviously it has a lot of tourism, but quite a number of people come to the island because they've read the books. And during Butte Noir, I actually run a bus tour of the sites on the island where the various things take. I don't actually drive the bus, fortunately. I do take people around the island and do readings and talk about the locations that I've used, and that's usually very successful.
Oh, brilliant. That sounds fabulous.
It does. I was just going to ask, actually, if you all share like pictures of the locations from your books when you're talking about them. Because people sort of have a thing about like islands, don't they? Especially, I think, that they maybe haven't visited, that they'd want to see what the locations would look like. So Myra, you do a bus tour. Do you take photos and share them as well?
Yes, yes. I mean, the whole Butte Noir obviously is a number of writers who come to the island and hold various talks and various events. And I do share a lot of photos of the island, share them a lot on my Facebook page, obviously, and talk about them. But I think because I come back to the point, because it's so near mainland Glasgow, people know it really well and can come for a day. So they do very often just like to, they always have a feeling of belonging, even although they're from another part of the country.
Kelly and Conrad, are you sharing pictures of your
yeah, what I sometimes do is
I mean, I tend to.
No, you go ahead, Conrad.
Sorry. I tend to use sort of Anglesey's a big tourist magnet. You know, there's thousands of caravans on the island and camping, and obviously with people doing staycations more and more and more, it's becoming more and more popular, and it's the landmarks, the tourist landmarks that are there, they're just sort of, they're iconic buildings or lighthouse, or there's a lot of history behind them. There's a lot of standing stones on the island. There's an air base there where the most of the fighter pilots in the UK are trained at RAF Valley in there. So there's all kinds of easily recognisable places that I use in the books. And I use a lot of pubs as well. So I think I'm going to steal that idea and maybe do a minibus pub tour. Around.
That's good.
around some of the storylines in the book, but going back to sort of writing about small communities and stuff like that, and trying not to offend anybody.
Yes.
If I do have a scene where there's something dodgy going on in a pub, then I try and use a pub which has been closed down, for a long time, so as not to offend any landlords or locals in pubs that are sort of still going. Yeah, it's easy to trip up on these things.
Yes, very easy. I am in Endgame at Port Bannatyne. Port Bannatyne's a small village on the island, and there's a hotel. During the Second World War, it was really the base for a lot of Americans who came over on recreational trips. And there's a large hotel on the corner at Port Bannatyne, and I turned that into a hotel, but I changed the name. It's been empty for years, but I think you've got still to be careful, even because people might have come looking for accommodation thinking it was open. So it was much better to give it a different name.
They'd be sadly disappointed.
Yeah, would be sadly disappointed.
And I guess even, even with, hotels, pubs, things like that, I try and be really careful in that I won't necessarily name the hotel. I mean, there's lots and lots of places on the island. It's still got quite a big tourism industry, but it's quite good because you can just describe, perhaps that sort of area. But then even in sort of doing so, and then trying to use the photos of the island, what I do sometimes is like maybe a picture of a view or something, and be saying, this is the last thing that such and such saw, this view, or this is the area, they were actually in. And I guess with any island, there's so much opportunity to be able to do that. I haven't thought about the bus trip yet. Given my driving, I will not be driving the bus, but I think it's a good idea.
I love the idea of you all getting together and just doing a bus tour around. Stopping off at pubs along the way.
We just need a boat or a plane in between.
Yeah. Sam says hi, everyone. Gwyn Garfield Bennett is watching, which is not a surprise because she's a big fan of Kelly. She says, how important is the location to your stories, or is it just a case of it being convenient and an area that you know? It's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll sort of pop in on that. I think for me, it's the locations and the places that sometimes give you that inspiration to begin with. So, and I guess with my books, I think, one very much had a theme around the fishing industry, and then some of the hotel and restaurant industry was brought into that as well, huge within the island. Another one, there was one of the old Martello Towers that are from Napoleonic times that had quite a pivotal, sort of part to it. So I think it's that inspiration for me. Certainly, it's that inspiration, around me to get those stories.
I do find the locations essential for me. I mean, this one, which is Endgame at Port Bannatyne, Alison has gone to the island. There's a film being made about the life of a Victorian worthy called James Hamilton of Kames, and she gets involved in that. But Kames Castle still exists. It's now holiday cottages, but it's a very important location in the island. And James Hamilton, I mean, people know about him. His grave is located beside Kames Castle, and he was buried standing up, so that on Resurrection Day, when all the dead bodies rose from the grave, the first thing he would do and first thing he would see was his beloved Kames Castle and Kames Bay. So that kind of thing I very much weave into the fabric of the stories.
Conrad, how important is the location to your stories?
I think it's probably I could probably set them anywhere else and not enjoy it as much. You know, in the creation process, you know, I'm walking around and driving around and looking around at a place that I absolutely love being. So I think that's really important to me in the creation process. The other thing is with it, where it's situated is, you know, it's surrounded by sea. There's plenty of places to put bodies. There's an old tin mine. There's quarries. You know, there's a lot of history there. And yet you know, it's only an hour or so from two of the biggest cities in the country. So Liverpool and Manchester are probably 2 hours away. The port, there's about 3.5 million people go through the port from Holyhead to Ireland. You know, and as with any big port, there's all kinds of things that goes on board ships that shouldn't be there. You know, it's an ideal situation for putting stuff in without sort of basing it in one of the biggest cities which are close by. My early books were set in and around Liverpool in the northwest, and I think it was just sort of refreshing when I moved all the stories to Anglesey. And I think initially my fear was that people would read them and go, oh, you know, that would never happen there on Anglesey. You know, that's where we go with the kids and the buckets and spades and stuff like that. But it's sort of it's almost irrelevant, you know, the setting. From a story point of view, as a reader, you know, you can read the story and I could set it in London or Liverpool or Anglesey. But from a marketing point of view and from attracting an audience to it, then using the island and the locations that people love, you know, they get attached to where they go on holiday, you know, and they have childhood memories of seeing the lighthouses and the castles and so on and so forth. And so really from a marketing point of view, you know, using an island, any 3 islands that we're all talking about here now will have a lot of meaning to people who don't actually live there, but, you know, they'll be very fond of the place. Yes. And hence they're more likely to download a book or pick it up and read it, you know. So it is important. Yeah.
Yes, but they sometimes pick you up, of course, on things in the books, you know, and say, now that road you said that leads to such and such, I don't think that's right. So you have to be very careful, don't you, in checking out your facts.
Yeah, or even spell. I mean, I thought this was really fun.
Never use Wikipedia.
Absolutely.
I used Wikipedia in one of the earlier books, and I think there's a mountain in Holyhead. Well, it's on Holy Island, which isn't really a mountain. Technically, it's too short. And the number of times I've been pulled up on that it's I think I said it was 900 and something feet from sea level, and I was pulled up on that by somebody local who actually did bus tours, believe it or not, around. Who spent about 45 minutes putting me straight on exactly how high Holyhead Mountain was. And he was very keen and eager to get the point over to me. And then when he finished, I said, yeah, but when I wrote the book, the tide was out. And you've never seen anybody so baffled. You've never seen anybody so baffled in all your life.
Brilliant. Love it.
You had the same problem on Jersey, Kelly?
I think one of the funny ones was in the first book, and that was where I had someone arrive at the airport, and they were being driven to a hotel. And I didn't name the hotel, but I kind of described arriving at it in that, and it's a pretty famous hotel. You couldn't mistake, you know, where it actually was. And it was actually someone at work said to me, "Your sense of direction is appalling." And I went, "Why?" And he said, "How did you get to there from the airport?" He said, "You don't go that way." I said, "I do, and it's my book, and I wrote it." So there you go.
So Sam is asking, she said in a previous panel they talked about using characters who were created by another author and have since gone out of copyright, like Sherlock Holmes. Is there a character you'd like to use in one of your books?
I think for me there is, but it's not. It will be about crime, but it's nothing to do with Kelly. So, and obviously, you have to think as well that if you're talking about that, it is quite a long period of time. That it would be. So you'd have to then potentially either write that crime as historical, or you'd be bringing it, up to date. The way they, as you say, Sherlock, they do sort of new, updated, Sherlock and things. And I think some people, if you do that, can do it really, really successfully.
I think it's more difficult if it's not a historical novel. I think it's quite tricky. Unless you're doing time lapse or something like that, where you're doing two different times frames, I think then, but otherwise for me, I think that would be quite difficult to write a present day novel with a character who'd gone out of copyright. What's that, 70 years, is it? 75 years for copyright? Something like that.
I'm not too sure for the character, but I think it's something like that. But yeah, and I think, I suppose as well, so often there are so many other characters in your head talking that.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah.
Conrad, any character you'd like to use?
I think so. Characters from other books. I would love to write a Hannibal Lecter book, or sort of include him in somewhere in a book. And then the other books which spring to mind are. My first joy of reading came reading The Rats by James Herbert, and the trilogy that he did was, I think it's the most fantastic trilogy that I've ever read. It's just brilliant, and his books sort of had me hooked to the point where I would go into every news agent I would pass as a teenager just to see if there was a new James Herbert out. But I think there's another book in The Rats there. Unfortunately, James has passed on now, so I can't ask him if he minds. But I think I would love to do something like that. Something, a book that has appealed to me. Silence of the Lambs, Red Dragon, the Hannibal character and stuff. It's just so evil and fantastic, and it's just, I would love to put that character somewhere into a story without being arrested.
Let's have a midway group favourite question. Hit us with your memorable moments as an author.
Ooh.
Who wants to go first with that one? It's a tricky one. Kelly's probably not a good answer because I've asked her it before.
Yeah, I think, when you think about memorable moments, and I think there can be so many of them. I think for me, a hugely memorable one was my friend Claire, who was in the UK, when she first got the paperback in her hands. That was a massive one, for me. And, actually having the book sort of out there. I think probably the most memorable, if I look back over time, was realising that people I didn't know, that didn't know me, were reading the first book and enjoying it. And that was kind of like, oh, wait a minute, that's fabulous. Not quite what I thought would happen, because I literally had done that first book for one very particular reason. But I think you get so many of them all the time, and some of them can be, something that someone might think, that's not a very big thing at all. But it can be something that is important to you.
Mm-hmm. I suppose mine might be somewhere quite far back, which kind of encouraged me to write, because I always wanted to write and always did scribble. But when I was 13, I won a national competition for a kind of piece of writing, an essay. And that was kind of very encouraging, as a teenager.
Oh, lovely.
Some people listening in may know this story, but the prize for the competition, you will never, ever guess what it was. It was a dog. A dog.
No!
That was the prize for the competition, was a dog.
That's the prize ever.
They turned up at the door to tell me I'd won with a dog.
You just wouldn't get away with that these days.
No, wouldn't get away with that these days. But that kind of inspired me to keep writing, and but I wrote a lot of non-fiction first of all.
Could I just ask though, did your parents, did they know about the dog?
No, I don't think so. My poor mother, everyone else that won some kind of award, it was a prize of money, but she got something which cost them money. But I think that kind of, at that age, I think if you get a bit of encouragement, it does make you feel that you want to kind of go on and do it.
Can't get over the dog.
I think from a memorable moments point of view, I think it's one of those gifts that it never stops giving. It just every day, you get comments in book groups, reviews appearing all the time, and each and every one of those are memorable to me, to be honest. I think it's sometimes you pinch yourself and think, wow, these I don't know where the books come from in the first place, but the fact that people read them and like them is just, that's just a massive bonus. It really is. I couldn't put my finger on any one thing, where you say, that I can really sort of say that was the outstanding moment, because they just don't stop coming. I think we're very lucky in the fact that you've got books out there which people enjoy reading. It's a lucky position to be in, I think, and it's all memorable. I'm not trying to be gooey about it, but I really do sort of enjoy every review, even the crap ones. They make me laugh. So it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, some of them are quite funny. I did an event with a writer who had a review on Amazon about a book which obviously had gone astray, because the review said a lovely colour and quite a good fit. So obviously it got mixed up with the review for some piece of a skirt or something, So.
So Sam's newest favourite question is, what's the most recent scene that you've written without giving away a spoiler? So think into what your work in progress is at the moment. What's the most recent thing you've written?
Well, at the moment, I'm writing a book which will be out for Christmas, and it's based on a company going to do the Sleeping Beauty pantomime. So I've just poisoned the king on stage during the pantomime.
As you do.
So I've just.
Oh no, you haven't.
Oh yes, I have. So that was fun.
Kelly, what's your most recent scene you've written?
Okay, the most recent scene that is a Kelly book is I guess the climax of the book, and it's a 1980s festival, and so. And it's the point where everything is sort of the crescendo, everything is coming together. And that is based on Jersey. They laugh and say Jersey in the 80s was a bit like Woodstock or something. If you can remember being there, you weren't actually there. And it was a fabulous place to be. And there's all these Facebook groups that you see with people all over the world joining, and it's all about Jersey in the 1980s, and it's people who maybe were here, they might have been here for a summer season. Tourism was huge then, and they may have come for a couple of years and moved on. So it was quite a satisfying one to write, because it's the one that everything had been working towards.
Fab. And Conrad?
I think about 12 chapters into the next instalment of the Anglesey murders, and this one's a bit of a starts off with quite an explosive scenes, set of scenes at the beginning, but most is set in and around Holyhead Police Station, which is a big old concrete monstrosity from I'm not sure what decade it was built in, but I'm sure you can picture the old prefabricated concrete buildings that were used as police stations. And I think they were designed with civil unrest in mind, so that all the windows were narrow, like the slits on a castle. And they were made and built so that they were easy to defend, I think. So I think at the time, politically, people were expecting political unrest, or certainly preparing for it if it ever happened. And it's not functional anymore, really, the station. I think there's a small set of employees which use part of the station, but the rest of it's been on for years. But you know, I've got this major investigation team that are there in a huge operations room, which looks like something off Juliet Bravo in my mind, anyway. You know, and it's fun setting scenes in the station when it's not actually used, if that makes sense. And it's actually next to the old cinema. It's directly behind the old cinema, which was an Empire, and it's a very small cinema, as you can imagine, in a small town like Holyhead. And in the 90s, the guy that owned it was a guy called Peter Moore, who is Wales's only serial killer. And he actually ran the Empire Theatre, which is behind the police station. He ran it for a while. So yeah, the latest scenes that I've been writing are in and around Holyhead and Holyhead Police Station. And I'm not telling you anymore.
There's another good question on the stream, actually. It says, when you start to write, is it an idea or a character that's in front of your mind?
I think for me, it's normally, I start off with a what if. And I guess 9 times out of 10, that what if is then a situation. So I think, oh, I wonder what would happen if. And then that maybe sort of floats about in my head for a while and I'm not really thinking about it. And then one day you have another thought and then another thought. And normally at that point, the sort of pivotal person will come into mind. Now that pivotal person might be someone who's interested in finding out what happened to someone who's been killed or something, or it might be the person who actually gets killed themselves, and then it just sort of builds out from there. But it definitely starts with a question.
I tend to most of my books tend to come from something that I've seen on the news. So you know, it would be, I wrote a book, the first of the Ramsey series, which was a long time ago, and it was one of the most successful titles that I've done, was called The Child Taker. And The Child Taker was written years and years after the event. It was in my mind, it was Madeleine McCann, which is the story from the news that you know you were all familiar with. And I always wanted to write a novel along that theme, you know, of the panic that parents must feel when they, you know, lose a child, you know, even if it's only for 5 minutes, you know. And I thought the intensity that you could get into a novel would be very powerful as a story. But that was news related. There's quite a few stories that have come from seeing things on the news about county lines. You know, it's just a never-ending pot of ideas. Really, is watching the news on TV, because you know what goes on in the real world is far more disturbing than anything that can go into a book. But really, I tend to get a theme from something that I've picked up on the news and thought, you know, that could really sort of, and then it just evolves from there.
I always start with a prologue, and the prologue isn't, I write in the first person for most of the book, but the prologue isn't. Prologue's in the third person, and that very often starts with a first line. And it's the first line that comes to me of the prologue. And just that's the way I work. But I think it's also quite important because it kind of pulls the reader in straight away. There's so much competition for books at the moment in terms of readers are just swamped, I think, with the number of books that are available. So I think it's quite important to get a good first line. And that, for me, is to be the first line of a prologue before the actual action starts with Alice and Cameron.
So based on that, with a lot of books being out at the moment, what are you all currently reading?
I'm currently reading book 8 in it's a series that is set by Octavia Randolph, and it's not crime, it's historical. It's set round about the year 800 odd, and it's the Circle of Ceridwen, and the historical accuracy, I mean, the story's fabulous and has kept it going through 8 books, but the historical accuracy is just amazing, just absolutely spot on. Huge big tome of the book, because I guess like any, I read totally, you know, across genre, and for me it's just the story. It's just the story grab you and pull it in. And I know maybe you get some people who say, oh, I only ever read crime, or I only ever read romance, or I only ever read historical. I'll pretty much read anything.
I'm reading Hamnet, Maggie O'Farrell's book about Shakespeare's son, which is really, really good. But I'm sort of
excellent.
Started that.
I've got that. I haven't started reading it yet. It's on that to be read.
Yes.
We'll have one of those. Conrad, what you reading?
I find it very difficult to read. That might sound odd coming from an author, but unless I'm abroad on my sunbed and bored, I find it really difficult to read, and that's before writing. I probably used to read 2 or 3 books a week, and that's one thing that I miss from what I do. Unfortunately, is I find it very, very difficult to read fiction. I don't mind reading the odd non-fiction book, you know, if it's about something that interests me. But actually picking up, you know, somebody else's crime novel and reading it, I find that my brain wanders away. I've gone through 3 or 4 pages and I've not taken any of it in, and I have to go back 3 or 4 pages, and then by that time I'll put it down and never pick it up again. But it's that's just, I think that it's probably because I don't have many periods where I'm not actually writing. So even when I finish a book, I might say I'm going to take a couple of months off, and very rarely do. You know, 9 times out of 10 within a week or so, I'm back into the next one. And once my mind is in creation mode, I find it difficult to read other people's fiction work. So I can't even remember the last crime novel that I read, but I know it would have been pre-COVID, probably in Tenerife or somewhere like that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
I probably moaned about it.
Yeah, I think if I was going to say if there was anything that writing had taken away from me, it would be the reading, because I would read, if I went in the days pre-Kindle, if I went on a 2-week holiday, I would have 14, 15 books with me, and I would read a book a day and power through it. I always had a book on the go, read every single night. Yes, of course, and I mean, I have a full-time day job as well, so you obviously have less time then when you're writing, but I find I've become too critical, and I start to read a book and I might be thinking, aha, there's the gun placed on the mantelpiece in the first act. We all know what's going to happen with that then, don't we? I just find that, and then I know when it's a great book, because none of that matters, and it all disappears, and I'm in that story. I'm just in the story. But I certainly, I don't read as much as I used to. But then again, I probably read too much. So,
can you read too much?
Yeah, actually, I'm in the wrong place to be saying that, really, aren't I?
But then I think you do read without realizing it. I mean, we're talking about a novel, but then you do read quite a lot in terms of research and background, and, you know, filling in empty spaces and that kind of thing. And
absolutely.
That you pick up things from the news, or so. I mean, you are involved in the world. You know, you're not one that's just quite writing in a garret, you know.
Absolutely. So just on that, on the research, where I find, I can't, get to a point when I'm writing and think, oh, I don't really know about that subject, I'll go XXX and I'll come back to it later. I have to know, is it possible? How would that happen? So let's say someone's going to be murdered, and then you're thinking, how are the police later going to know that that wasn't an accident, right? And then you think, oh, I wonder. So then I start Googling it. And then an hour and a half later, when I'm looking up a recipe for something, because I've gone from, I'm like, how did that happen? But then I know people who can say, well, actually, I don't know that, but it really doesn't matter. I'll come back to it later. Which are you?
Oh, that's quite hard. I don't know. I think probably, I think probably a bit of both. It just depends on what kind of mood I'm in, you know, and what, how much I've got to do. I think the trouble about research, because I use so much history and geography in my books, although I'm very much like you, Kelly, I have no sense of direction, but because I use history and geography in my books, I do a lot of research for the history.
Mm-hmm.
So that does take up quite a bit of time. But then I do a lot of research on foot. You know, I'm on the island and can go to places and look at them and explore them. I find the internet is a time bandit, really. That's the problem.
That's true. What about you, Conrad?
What was the actual question?
No, I was just wondering, I'm just saying, you know, how I find it really difficult. If there's something I need to research, I have to do it at that point as I'm writing, and I break off and I go and search, which is probably a really, really bad thing to do. I just wonder how you do it.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much exactly the same as you. So I'll have a Word document open on the screen. And then if I come along to, especially using places on the island, because even being familiar, I'm not well speaking, but I can pronounce places, you know, and even the pronunciation sometimes is deceiving to how it's actually spelt. So I now have to go to Google Maps and just see exactly how that village is spelt, or exactly how that church is spelt, or whatever, and make sure it's right. So and then you'll get lost in something else. Then, you know, start reading something else, and all of a sudden an hour's gone past, and I can't remember what I was looking for in the first place. So I do definitely research. I research as I'm going along.
Yeah.
I don't sit down and I can't write to a plan at all.
Mm-hmm.
But that works for me. So I tend to research as I'm going through, you know, writing and come across something that I'm not one who could sort of write it down a list and then have to go back and research it. I have to do it one at a time.
Well, I'm glad it's not just me.
But that's
I can leave gaps.
No, I mean that's very much sort of part of my writing process. It's just it's ingrained in the way I've written every book, and I don't think it's whatever it's for you, really. I think there's no right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. No, there's no right or wrong. I mean, the only thing I find sometimes if I do break off is it really, really interrupts the flow. I'm better just to put a question mark and just continue to the end of the scene or end of the chapter, and then go back. And sometimes
I wouldn't remember what the question mark was for. That's my problem. I'm a proper goldfish brain. You know, I'd put the question mark there and then go,
So Sam wants to know if you've got a favourite relationship that you've created, or a favourite sort of team of characters, or something like that.
I think it's the dynamics with those characters as well, and I think a lot of people who write crime, I guess that their main protagonists who they have, you know, going through the series, I think are often, you know, the characters, because you're developing them as they go on, and you're developing their relationships as they sort of go through. For me, my DCI Leclair, he's a Jersey boy who went to London, worked there in the London Met. Something happened, he ends up back home in the island. But he's a bit of a rich kid. Jersey is a place, like many places, that has a lot of very, very wealthy people, a load of ordinary people, and a load of people who are really, really struggling. And I try and bring some of that into the book as well. But his sidekick, She's transferred to Jersey from Scotland, and she was working in Glasgow, and they're very, very different characters. And I think, you know, he's bringing her sort of a bit out of her shell, and I think she's getting him to be a little bit less perfect and a little bit more human sometimes.
Myra, favourite relationship?
Well, I suppose the main character in my book, Alison Cameron, she is married, and her husband's kind of long-suffering, really, to be quite honest, and always seems to be telling her to not get into trouble, and she does. And that's been in a kind of on-off relationship, because he took up a post in Washington, and so they've been apart for quite a while. But I brought them back together in this new book that I'm writing. But I don't know what's going to happen in the end, really. I think the worst relationship really was the one where Alison really was castigated by so many readers because she left her cat behind when she went away. No one really worried about the relationship between Alison and her husband, but they were very worried about the relationship Alison and her cat.
You can't be doing that.
Oh, I know. I've learned my lesson.
No, don't mention animals. No. I think from my own point of view, this the Anglesey murders. I started it when we lost my brother-in-law, unfortunately, who I'd been friends with from 17 years of age, and so I made up this character, which was Alan Williams, which was his name. And of course, he was based at Holyhead Police Station, and it was sort of my way of keeping him around for a bit. And I thought, I'm going to do a couple of books with this character in it. And now I'm on book 10, and he's still going. But the relationships within the book and the team are basically, most of the team are people from the local pub that we used to drink in. So there's a couple of long-term employees in there, and a couple of long-term locals and stuff, and they all know who they are, you know. And the relationship between them, I can pretty much hear them all in the bar, you know, going back sort of 5, 6, 7 years ago when we all would have been in there, and hearing the voices. And the relationship in the book is pretty much what would have gone on a social level. You know, there was a lot of wit between them, sarcasm, you know, taking the mickey out of each other. And so those relationships, I really enjoyed keeping those relationships going in the book. And of course the readers, you know, will be completely unaware of who these characters are in reality, and maybe I take a bit of solace from it. I don't know, maybe writing that story with those people in it and stuff, it's cathartic. But you know, those relationships, I really enjoy being with those characters when I'm writing the novels.
So you've answered one of Sam's other questions already a little bit, Conrad, because she asked if any of you had ever named a character after a real person.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I have. Yeah. And I've, you know, quite a few times, but not without asking.
Yeah.
and generally just because it's you know, asked, you know, local charity, something like that, and they've asked and said, you know, could you maybe offer up for the auction, you know, for someone to be, you know, named as a character. I think, though, as we said earlier, I spend most of my time trying to make sure I haven't inadvertently used, you know, someone's name. I did in the first book, and I can't change that name because they're a pivotal character. The person whose name it was actually got in touch with me through Facebook saying, asked to become a friend, became friends, and said, I absolutely know you didn't do this on purpose, but just so you know, I'm going to tell everybody that you actually did do it on purpose, and I'm going to pretend that I know you. And I went, that's absolutely fine, that's okay.
It does work the other way, though. I mean, I found my name in a series of children's sort of mystery books by an American writer.
There you go.
So I suppose it happens, doesn't it? You know, it's very hard, unless you make up a completely freakish name, not to have someone in the world that has that name.
Yeah.
Have you ever named anyone?
I had an ex-employee in my previous life. I was an area manager with McDonald's, and I looked after 20 odd restaurants in and around Cheshire and North Wales. And many years later, when I started writing, there was an employee who was there at the time who was also writing, and he wrote a book, and he'd named the baddie after me, and it was my full name as well. He described me to a T. And somebody told me years later that, did you know Simon's put you in his book? I said no. And he said, "Oh yeah, you're the baddie in this one." So there you go. And you can't even pretend with a name like Conrad, can you? You can't even pretend it's not me.
That's excellent, though. So we're coming up. We've got 5 minutes left of our panel. Do you want to just give us a quick recap of yourselves and your books? And I know some people will have recognised them anyway, because Myra and Kelly's books have just been up in our charity auction for Red Kite, haven't they? So
yes,
people who've got signed copies winging their way to them as we speak.
Yes.
So let's start. We'll start at the top again with Conrad. Give us a recap of yourselves and your books.
I'm sorry. What's the question?
Give me a recap of you and your books, because we've got 5 minutes left.
Right. Okay. I'm writing book number 10 in the Anglesey Murder series, which is basically a follow-on from the 2 previous series, and they all sort of merge into one long series, if you like. So it's 25 books long, although they're all related. And I split the series purely from a marketing point of view, that once you get to sort of about 6, 7, 8, number 8 in a series, and you release it, then the only people who are going to read 8 are the people who've read 1 to 7. So, from a marketing point of view, it makes sense to make a clean break somewhere at the end of one series and then lead into another. And they pretty much all run in tandem, so you don't have to read one series before another to get to the. And I try and make each novel standalone, so you could just pick it up, read it, and not be aware of anything that the characters have done in a previous novel. So you pretty much you can go out there and look me up and look at a cover and see if you like it, and you could read that book, without reading anything else, and give them a try. A lot of the series, well, in fact, all the series have been packed down into box sets. And so what happens with when I get a back catalogue, release something new, the back catalogues to that series, I tend to put them into box sets. And all the box sets at the moment are priced at $1.99. So you're getting 5 or 6 books, an entire series at the moment for $1.99 on Amazon. So if you fancy it, and they're all on Kindle Unlimited too. So if you've got Kindle Unlimited, you can read 24 and a bit books. And if you read quickly, you'll be just in time to get the next one, because I think that'll be out about November.
Kelly?
Okay, thank you. So I will have, not this year, the 5th Jack Leclair will be out early next year, and that's Blood Memory. Really interesting point from Conrad there. Although there is like a common arc, there's an arc going through the books about the main character, but I deliberately wrote them so you could pick one up and the entire mystery is there and you don't have to worry, about having read the other books. Because I know I've done that myself in the past. I've sort of picked up and not realised I'm halfway through a series and then felt really disgruntled because there's so many things I don't understand or know. I also write standalone thrillers, and Cyber Sisters as one that's very much, it's really focused on internet, online, people perhaps pretending to be someone else, and about 4 women who basically get scammed. And then as my alter ego, I'm Julia Hardy. I write historical murder mysteries with some romance, and I'm nearly finished Caroline, the one I'm working on just now, and that'll be out soon.
Kelly knew I was smiling then, because that's my favourite. The one that she writes. Myra?
Well, I write the Isle of Bute mystery series. I try to make them stand alone because I think that is quite important, although people very often like to read them in order. But I also write other kinds, other genres. I mean, I've written a children's mystery story. I've written a romance set in a riding stables just outside Glasgow. I've written a contemporary novel set in modern day Glasgow. I have a science fiction in progress. I even have a Western in progress called Judgment Day at Drystone Gulch. So I've got a whole, but I like to write different kinds of things, but my main focus is the Isle of Bute mystery series.
I'm going to finish off with a comment from Anne Thomas, who says it's been an interesting interview. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, and good to see you all.
Yeah, lovely to chat, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.